great pleasure to be here on my first anniversary, I hope it's the first anniversary, to address this particular gathering. It was a little earlier this year that something happened, I think, that perfectly illustrated the closeness of the friendship between the United Kingdom and the United States. When we saw the USS Winston Churchill with a Royal Navy navigator on board, with a white ensign flying from the yardarm, escorting the gigantic USS Theodore Roosevelt to the shores of the Solent. I was privileged to be given a guided tour of the Roosevelt and to meet her captain and crew. And it was that day, during those conversations, that I saw for myself why 70 years on from our great Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic, we are still collaborating the world over, from the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean, from the Gulf to the Baltic. And that's because whatever cultural and historical differences we may have had, we share as two countries the same values of tolerance, of liberty, of the rule of law. And here at Chatham House, a venue whose origins lie rooted in the joint desire of British and Americans after the Great War to study international problems and thereby help prevent future conflicts, it's worth reflecting that our nations share not just values, but something else, a sense of global responsibility and a determination to act when those values are threatened. And they are threatened today in multiple ways, whether by an expansionist Russia, which the newly nominated chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I note, has called the biggest threat to the United States, whether from the evil ISIL-Daesh caliphate marauding across the Middle East, whether from Chinese ambition in the South China Sea, or whether from failing states in Africa, causing ripples of instability throughout that region and the famine and mass migration that those cause. In their diversity, in their concurrence, and in their complexity, these dangers pose to us, I think, the greatest challenge now since the end of the Cold War. Why? Because they threaten to undermine the global rules-based system on which our values are based, on which we as nation states have lived and traded with each other these past 20 or so years. And it is our navies that have a unique role to play in helping to tackle those challenges head on, to resolve the conflicts that lie behind them, and to put off the threats of tomorrow. Why? Because navies can respond rapidly to situations almost anywhere on the globe, because navies can provide a platform to project force inland, and because navies offer us options where the land environment is not always permissive. So let me just reassure you today that the United Kingdom is determined to make the most of its maritime capabilities in three ways. First, by taking a strategic approach, comprehensively assessing the threats we face, identifying the capabilities that we need in air, on land, and at sea, and ensuring our naval assets are deployed in the most effective way, properly integrated with the other service arms and playing their part alongside our international allies. How are we doing that? Our first Strategic Defence and Security Review 5 years ago put us, I think, in the right place. It recognised the need to build on the Royal Navy's traditional flexibility in adjusting to this new era of contingency. Our second review, now underway, with direct American defence involvement in the process, has now begun. And following the Chancellor's very welcome announcement that our defence budget will now grow every year for the rest of the decade, we now have the certainty and confidence to conduct that full review, knowing that the United Kingdom will continue to meet our NATO pledge to spend 2% of GDP on defence for the rest of the decade. And that brings me to the second point. With a growing budget now, we're determined to put our money where our mouth is. We already have the largest navy in Europe, but we are determined to make sure that our fleet is fit for the future. So having put the defence budget back on an even keel and properly balanced it, we've been able now to put aside some 160 billion for our 10-year equipment plan. And we're spending that money on what we now call full spectrum capability, on nuclear-powered hunter-killer submarines, submarines as sophisticated as the Space Shuttle. Just last week, I visited our third, HMS Artful, as she prepared to set sail from the Barrow shipyard to join Ambush and Astute in guarding our sea lanes, in protecting our deterrent, in standing ready to use her cruise missiles against the terrorist threat. We're spending it on versatile offshore patrol vessels, vessels with a range of 5,000 miles. I had the privilege of cutting steel last month on the second of those 3 patrol vessels, HMS Medway. We're spending it on Scan Eagle, the Royal Navy's first unmanned air system. We're spending it on a phalanx of new frigates with cutting-edge design. And of course, we're continuing to spend on our regenerated carrier strike capability. These 2 new flagships of our fleet, the 65,000-ton aircraft carriers, HMS Queen Elizabeth, which floated up last year, and HMS Prince of Wales, now firmly under construction at Rosyth, are the biggest and most powerful warships the Royal Navy has ever had. They will operate with state-of-the-art crow's nest helicopter-borne surveillance, and they will be able to deploy 5th-generation stealth fighter F-35B Lightning IIs. And since we cannot be sure that there will be no nuclear threat to our country in the 2030s, the 2040s, and the 2050s, we will also be replacing all 4 of our ballistic missile submarines. That is the investment that has been made possible by sorting out the defence budget and by committing ahead to growing our budget in real terms. My third and final point is that we are also committed to acting in partnership. We're using our global naval reach to strengthen and extend our international partnerships. Multilaterally, we're supporting NATO exercises in the Balkans. A few weeks ago, I stood on the deck of USS San Antonio, watching amphibious landings taking place in the 17-nation Bulltops exercise. That exercise, and our recent announcement that we will stick to the 2% target, send a shot across the bows of our adversaries that we will not cower from defending our interests and our NATO commitment. But it also sends a signal to our NATO allies that they too must stick to the spending pledges they promised at the Wales summit last year. Meanwhile, we're also supporting European Union missions, combating terrorism and piracy off the Horn of Africa, and most recently working in the Mediterranean to help rescue thousands of people setting off across from the shore of North Africa. In the Far East, we retain naval facilities to support our operations in the region, as well as our commitment to the 5-power defence arrangements. We've also expanded our naval footprint in the Gulf by establishing our first permanent naval base there since 1971. But amongst all these different partnerships and international collaborations, above all, we're continuing to work with our great friends from the United States. This is a relationship that goes from strength to strength, We've been supporting your US battle group in the Gulf, sending HMS Duncan to protect your personnel as they flew strikes against ISIL day and night to help support us here in Europe in the fight against terrorism. And in turn, you've been supporting us with USS Vicksburg supporting our regular joint warrior exercises, with USS Wasp hosting Royal Navy and Royal Air Force teams as they test out the F-35B. We're also collaborating, and Secretary Carter and I want to do more. We're collaborating on research and development. We've recently signed a master submarine research agreement and related agreements on undersea technologies, making sure that our two countries maintain our technological edge in a world of weapons proliferation, of exponential technological advance, and increased defense competition amongst emerging nations. We do this together, as your president said, I think just last night, as primary partners, indispensable to each other. So before I conclude, I would like to thank Admiral Greenert. He has been an unstinting supporter of that US-UK friendship. He has done so much to advance our relationship. And as his tenure now comes to a close, I have no doubt that he will take pride in knowing that though the world is becoming a darker and increasingly more dangerous place, that just as we once sailed together in the great Battle of the Atlantic, our Royal Navy will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with our American allies. And as one of only 4 countries in the world spending money on building aircraft carriers, as one of a handful of NATO nations whose defense budget is growing, as one of only 2 nations with a genuinely global reach, the two of us, Britain and the United States, will continue to defend the shores of freedom.